I'm waking up before the alarm vibrates on my wristwatch, my internal clock synchronized to the drop in temperature that precedes the dawn. The air inside the shelter is stagnant and heavy, carrying the metallic taste of cold stone and the underlying sweet rot of the damp earth pressing against the reinforced walls. I lie still for 60 seconds, executing the standard auditory sweep of the immediate perimeter, filtering the ambient noise through the stone structure. There is the low-frequency drone of the wind vibrating against the external rhododendrons, and the rhythmic hollow dripping of condensation falling from a ceiling beam onto the plastic tarp covering the supplies. My breath forms a visible plume in the dim gray light, dissipating quickly against the thermal insulation layers I have stapled to the rock face. The cold here is not just a temperature, it is a physical weight that stiffens the joints and slows reaction times. I flex my fingers inside the sleeping bag, counting the articulations to ensure dexterity before I expose my hands to the air. The internal thermometer reads 4 degrees Celsius. Getting out of the sleeping bag requires a calculated sequence of movements to minimize heat loss and noise. I slide the zipper down slowly, gripping the metal tab with my thumb and forefinger to prevent the teeth from rasping. As I sit up, the dampness of the Appalachian underground immediately clings to the thermal undershirt I have worn for 3 days straight. The shelter, a repurposed civilian conservation corps structure from the last century, is effectively a stone lung that breathes moisture. I have lined the interior walls with scavenged truck tarps and dried moss to create a thermal break, but the humidity is an invasive force. It swells the wood of the support beams and corrodes the contacts on the electronics if left unchecked. I reach for my boots, which I keep upside down on a grate to prevent insects from nesting inside, and lace them tight, checking the knot tension. Every piece of clothing is inspected for wear. A tear in the fabric now means hypothermia later. My primary focus shifts immediately to the power bank situated on the retrofitted workbench. The LED display is the only source of artificial light in the room, glowing a faint, angry red. The readout shows the main lead-acid battery array is sitting at 42% capacity. This is a critical threshold. The cloud cover has been dense for the past week, suffocating the output of the flexible solar mats I have woven into the tree canopy above. I run my hand over the casing of the batteries. They are cold to the touch, which reduces their chemical efficiency. I make a mental note to rotate the position of the cells later, bringing the weaker ones closer to the stove's radiant zone, assuming I can risk lighting it tonight. The deficit in voltage means I have to ration the radio usage strictly to receive only mode for the next 6 hours. Transmission is an expensive luxury that costs amp hours I simply do not have right now. I move to the Little Mo cast iron stove in the corner, a relic I salvaged from a ruined cabin in the valley 3 months ago. It sits cold and dormant, a black iron mass that sucks heat from the room when not lit. I cannot ignite it during daylight hours, even with the baffles I installed in the chimney to disperse the smoke. The visual signature against the gray sky is too risky. I open the iron door, checking the ash pan. It is full. I will need to bury the waste ashes later, mixing them with water and soil to neutralize the smell before spreading them far from the perimeter. I take a handful of dried birch bark from my tinderbox and arrange it inside the firebox, preparing it for nightfall. The anticipation of heat is a dangerous psychological crutch, so I force myself to close the iron door and focus on the immediate cold. Discipline is the only thing separating me from the chaos outside. Breakfast is a mechanical necessity, devoid of enjoyment. I open a sealed container of cold oats, soaked in water overnight. The texture is paste-like and flavorless, but it provides the necessary carbohydrates to fuel the shivering reflex that keeps my core temperature up. I eat standing up, facing the heavy oak door that separates me from the mountainside, listening. The hyperacusis, my sensitivity to sound, is both a tactical asset and a torture. I can hear the scratching of a rodent in the drainage pipe 10 meters away. I can distinguish between the erratic rustle of a squirrel and the deliberate rhythmic compression of boots on leaves. Right now, the forest sounds natural. The chaotic rhythm of nature is undisturbed. If the birds suddenly stop singing, or if the wind carries a sound that lacks a natural decay, I will know. I finish the oats and rinse the bowl with a precious cup of filtered rainwater, drinking the gray runoff to waste nothing. It is time to address the power deficit. Since the solar input is negligible, I have to rely on the manual dynamo, a hand-cranked generator bolted to the stone floor. I sit on the modified bicycle seat and grip the rubberized handles, The resistance is heavy, the magnets fighting the coil with every rotation. I start a steady rhythm, aiming for 60 revolutions per minute. The generator emits a low-pitched whine, a vibration that travels up my arms and settles in my teeth. This is the tax I pay for electricity. 10 minutes of cranking gives me enough charge for perhaps 3 minutes of listening time on the high-frequency bands. Sweat begins to form under my layers, which is dangerous. Wet clothes kill. I have to pace myself, cranking for 5 minutes, then resting for 2 to let the sweat vaporize, then cranking again. The physical exertion warms the shelter slightly, a byproduct of my own labor. After an hour of manual charging, the battery bank reads 48%. It is not enough for a full broadcast, but it is enough to monitor the traffic. I move to the radio bench, a chaotic spread of wires, circuit boards, and cannibalized electronics. My primary transceiver is an older solid-state unit, modified to run on 12 volts. I put on the headphones, the heavy cups sealing around my ears and plunging me into a world of pure audio. I flip the master switch. The needle on the signal meter jumps, and the hiss of white noise floods my brain. This is the sound of the world now. Static, interference, and the crackle of atmospheric discharge. I slowly turn the tuning dial, scrolling through the frequencies. Most are dead air, a graveyard of silence where commercial broadcasts used to be. I am not looking for music. I am looking for the anomalies in the static that indicate human presence. I tune into the frequency used by the local militia, a band they think is secure because it sits just outside the standard amateur radio range. I know their schedule. At 800 hours, their operator, a man who calls himself Karen, begins his morning roll call. The signal cuts through the static, distorted but intelligible. His voice is raspy, arrogant, amplified by a powerful transmitter that likely runs on a seized diesel generator. He reads a list of coordinates, checkpoints where they have established dominance. I write down the grid references on a notepad, my pencil scratching softly against the paper. This information is vital. It tells me where the dead zones are, the areas where refugees will be intercepted if they try to cross. I am mapping the enemy's movement without ever leaving my chair, building a picture of the valley floor based solely on the voltage inducing my speaker cone. Karen's transmission shifts tone. He starts reading names. This is his psychological warfare. He lists people they have detained, or worse. I force myself to remain detached, treating the names as data points rather than human beings. If I engage emotionally, I lose focus. I analyze the background noise of his transmission. I hear the faint echo of a heavy door slamming in his background, and the hum of a 60-cycle electrical main. He is indoors, likely in the industrial district to the east, connected to a grid. Triangulating him is impossible for me with a single receiver, but the signal strength suggests he hasn't moved his transmission site in weeks. Complacency is his weakness. He believes he is the only one listening. He doesn't know about the ghost net, or the fact that I am recording his patterns to guide people around his patrols. I switch frequencies, moving to the lower bands. My antenna setup is unconventional, designed for stealth rather than range. I do not use a vertical mast that could be spotted by a drone or a patrol with binoculars. Instead, I utilize a ground dipole system. I have buried 2 lengths of insulated copper wire, each 20 meters long, just below the surface of the soil outside, running parallel to the contour of the hill. This configuration forces the radio waves to shoot straight up into the ionosphere and bounce back down in a localized umbrella pattern. Near vertical incidence skywave, NVIS. It allows me to communicate over the mountains without the signal spilling out into the neighboring states where it could be intercepted by more sophisticated listening posts. It is a tactical whisper, effective only within a regional bubble. The humidity is affecting the equipment. I can hear a subtle crackle in the audio potentiometer when I adjust the volume, a sign that oxidation is building up on the internal contacts. This is the constant war against entropy. I disconnect the headset and pull the radio unit forward. Using a small jeweler's screwdriver, I open the chassis. The smell of hot electronics and ozone mixes with the damp cave air. Inside, I see the faint green patina of corrosion starting to form on the brass standoffs. I take a cotton swab dipped in isopropyl alcohol. My supply is dwindling dangerously low, and gently clean the affected areas. My hand must be steady. One slip could short a capacitor or break a delicate trace on the circuit board. In this world, there are no replacement parts. If I break this, I am deaf. While the radio dries, I turn my attention to the water filtration system. The natural spring that used to feed this area has been contaminated by runoff from the chemical plant fires during the initial collapse. I rely entirely on rainwater collection. A series of gutters hidden in the brush funnel water into a plastic barrel buried next to the shelter wall. A gravity-fed line runs through a homemade filter of sand, charcoal, and gravel before dripping into my clean reservoir. I check the flow rate. It is sluggish. The filter is clogged with sediment. I will need to disassemble it and backwash the sand layer. It is a tedious, messy job that consumes time and calories, but dehydration kills faster than bullets. The water in the collection cup is clear, but I add a drop of bleach just to be sure. Paranoia is a survival trait. I hear a disturbance outside. My head snaps up, eyes locking on the heavily bolted door. It was not a footstep. It was the sound of a branch snapping under tension, distinct from the random falling of dead wood. I freeze, holding my breath to lower my own auditory noise floor. I wait. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Then I hear the scolding chatter of a squirrel. I exhale slowly. It was likely a deer or a bear moving through the brush, disturbing the wildlife. The adrenaline dump leaves a metallic taste in my mouth. My heart rate monitor shows 120 beats per minute. I force myself to execute a breathing exercise. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. I cannot afford to be jumpy. Panic leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to exposure. I decide to check the external traps. I need protein. I suit up, layering a Gore-Tex shell over my thermal gear. I pull on a balaclava to cover my face. The white skin would be a beacon in the dark greens and browns of the forest. Before opening the door, I check the peephole. A small optical fiber threaded through the stone. The sector looks clear. I unlock the 3 heavy deadbolts, sliding the steel bars back with well-practiced silent motions. I push the door open just enough to slip through. The rush of cold air is instantaneous, carrying the scent of wet pine, decaying leaves, and the distant acrid smell of wood smoke from the valley settlements. I close the door behind me, ensuring the latch clicks softly into place. I am now exposed. Moving through the forest requires a different mindset. I shift my weight from heel to toe, rolling my feet to feel for twigs before committing my full weight. This is the fox walk. I keep my profile low, staying close to the tree trunks, blending my silhouette with the vertical lines of the forest. The trap line is a loop of 500 meters around the shelter. I use simple snare traps made of braided fishing line and picture-hanging wire. They are invisible to the eye unless you know exactly where to look. The first trap is empty, the loop still suspended over the rabbit run. The second trap has been sprung, but the wire is broken. Something large, perhaps a raccoon or a coyote, brute-forced its way out. I curse silently. That is a waste of good wire. At the third trap, I find success. A large opossum is caught by the neck, dead. It is not an appetizing meal, but it is meat. I kneel down, scanning the woods around me for 30 seconds before touching the animal. I check for signs that the carcass has been disturbed by scavengers, or worse, used as bait by a human hunter. The scene looks clean. I release the wire, resetting the snare immediately. I tie the carcass to my belt, the weight a comforting reassurance that I will eat tonight. I move quickly to the remaining traps. Finding them empty, I do not linger. Every minute outside the shelter increases the probability of an encounter. The fog is rolling in thicker now, obscuring the treetops. It is good cover, but it also muffles sound, blinding my primary sense. Returning to the shelter entrance, I perform a counter-surveillance loop. I walk past the door for 50 meters, then double back in a wide arc to ensure I am not being followed. I check the telltales. Small, invisible threads of black cotton I have strung across the approach paths at knee height. If a thread is broken, I know someone has passed through. The threads are intact. I approach the door, keying the mechanical combination lock by touch. I slip inside, locking the world out behind me. The relief is palpable, a physical decompression of the chest. I hang the game on a hook to drain and strip off my wet outer layer. Back inside, the silence is heavy. I clean the animal efficiently, saving the pelt for insulation and the bones for broth. The meat goes into a pot with water and dried herbs. While it cooks, I return to the radio. It is time for the scheduled GhostNet check-in. This is the most dangerous part of my day. I am not just listening, I am acting as a relay. I wait for the specific burst transmission from the south. It comes at 11 a.m. exactly, A screech of digital data lasting less than 2 seconds. To anyone else, it sounds like a glitch. To my decoding software, running on a salvaged Toughbook laptop with the screen brightness turned to 0, it is a text message. The message decodes. Group Alpha. 12 packs. Sector 7. Moving north. Need route. My hands hover over the telegraph key. I do not use a microphone. Voice carries too much recognizable data and takes too long. I use Morse code, or rather, a compressed digital burst triggered by the key. I look at the map, tracing the route away from Karen's checkpoints. I formulate the response. Vector 330, avoid river. Bridge compromised, use old logging road. I type this into the buffer. I check the standing wave ratio, SWR, on the transmitter to ensure the antenna is resonant. I take a deep breath and hit the send switch. The transmitter hums for 1.5 seconds. The heat sink warms up slightly. The message is gone, bounced off the ionosphere to a receiver 50 miles away. I immediately cut the power to the transmitter. The adrenaline crash follows the transmission. I sit in the dark, watching the signal meter drop to 0. Did anyone hear that? Did Karen's scanners pick up the spike in RF energy? I watch the spectrum analyzer, looking for a reaction. Usually if they detect a signal, they flood the frequency with jamming noise or try to bait the operator into talking again. The spectrum remains clear. The noise floor is stable. I got away with it. For now, I rub my temples, feeling the tension headache that lives permanently behind my eyes. This is the game. Seconds of action followed by hours of paralyzing paranoia. I spend the afternoon engaged in equipment maintenance. The dampness is relentless. I have to wipe down every metal tool with an oily rag to prevent rust. I disassemble my backup handheld radio, a Baofeng UV5R, checking the battery contacts. The lithium-ion battery is swollen slightly, a bad sign. It is degrading. I mark it with a piece of red tape. It is now for emergency use only. I have a stash of CR123 batteries for my flashlight and optics, but they are finite. I count them again. 44 batteries. If I use one a week, I have less than a year of reliable light. I update the inventory list on the wall, the numbers decreasing with terrifying consistency. The smell of the stew fills the small space, masking the scent of mold. I eat slowly, chewing every bite thoroughly to maximize digestion. The meat is gamey and tough, but the warm broth helps raise my body temperature. As I eat, I review the logbook from the previous month. I am looking for patterns in the militia's movements. They seem to be pushing further up the mountain as the resources in the valley dwindle. They are getting desperate. Desperate men take risks. They might start combing the ridges, looking for old cabins or bunkers. I look at the reinforced door. Is it enough? A shaped charge or a heavy ram would breach it. My defense relies on not being found, not on withstanding a siege. I decide to inspect the antenna leads again. The coaxial cable runs from the back of the radio, through a conduit in the wall, and out into the soil. I measure the resistance with a multimeter. It reads 50 ohms, which is perfect. However, the connection point where the cable meets the radio feels loose. The solder joint is fatiguing from the constant vibration of plugging and unplugging. I will need to reflow the solder. I fire up the butane soldering iron. The hiss of the gas is loud in the quiet room. I wait for the tip to glow orange. The heat is comforting. I apply the tip to the joint, feeding in a tiny amount of silver solder. The smoke rises, stinging my eyes, but the connection solidifies into a shiny, smooth cone. A good joint. A reliable joint. The wind outside is picking up. I can hear it whistling through the vents of the shelter. The pressure change makes my ears pop. A storm is coming. Storms are a mixed blessing. They mask the sound of my generator and wash away my tracks, but the lightning creates massive static interference on the radio bands, rendering them useless. And the thunder is a nightmare for my hyperacusis. It feels like a physical blow to the head. I prepare my ear protection, heavy industrial earmuffs that I wear when the storm is directly overhead. I check the barometer on the wall. The needle is dropping like a stone. I check the little Moe stove again. It is dark enough outside now to risk a fire. I light the birch bark, feeding it small twigs until the flame catches. I add larger pieces of hardwood, seasoned oak that burns hot and slow with minimal smoke. The stove ticks and pings as the metal expands. The warmth radiates outward, pushing back the damp chill. I place a kettle of water on the top plate. Hot water is a luxury that boosts morale. I watch the flames through the small mica window in the door, mesmerized. Fire is the oldest technology, the companion of the lonely. With the fire established, I turn off the main battery bank to conserve power. I switch to a small battery-operated LED lantern for task lighting. The shadows in the room lengthen and dance. The bunker feels smaller at night. The walls closing in. I sit on my cot, picking up a technical manual for a military field radio. I have read it 100 times, but I read it again. Memorizing the schematics keeps my mind sharp. I trace the circuit diagrams with my finger, visualizing the flow of electrons. It is a logic puzzle that has a solution, unlike the world outside. A noise on the radio interrupts my reading. I left the scanner on low volume, powered by a separate small battery. It is a voice, but not Karen. It is weak, breaking up in the static. Any station. Kids are sick. Need help. It sounds like a woman. She is on an open channel, broadcasting in the clear. Amateur mistake. She is screaming her position to anyone with a direction-finding loop. I reach for the volume, turning it up slightly. My hand hovers over the microphone. The instinct to help is a vestigial reflex from a society that no longer exists. If I answer, I expose the nest. If I answer, Karen hears me. I listen. The transmission repeats. She is terrified. I can hear the desperation in her voice. I look at the map. Based on the signal strength and the flutter, she is likely in the valley to the west, near the old highway overpass. That is militia territory. They are likely already triangulating her. I grit my teeth. The protocol is clear. Protect the network. Individual assets are expendable. The relay infrastructure is not. I cannot save everyone. I turn the volume down, but I do not turn it off. I have to know if she gets caught. I have to bear witness. It is the penance I pay for my silence. 10 minutes later, I hear a new voice on the frequency. It is Karen. Well, hello there, darling. Sounds like you're having a rough night. His voice is smooth, mocking. The woman stops transmitting. She knows. The silence that follows is heavier than before. I imagine the patrol trucks revving their engines, the spotlights sweeping the dark highway. I imagine the outcome. I feel a surge of nausea. I switch the radio off completely. I cannot listen to the end. I am a coward hiding in a hole, hoarding electricity while the world burns. I lay back on the cot, staring at the rough-hewn timber of the ceiling. The heat from the stove is making me drowsy, but my mind is racing. The isolation is a physical thing, a void that tries to fill itself with memories of failure. I check the voltage one last time, 45%. I have survived another day. I have kept the signal path open. Tomorrow, I will have to go further out to check the solar panels. The storm debris might have covered them. It will be dangerous, but that is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, I just need to sleep without dreaming of the woman's voice. I pull the sleeping bag up to my chin, listening to the wind howl, waiting for the oblivion of sleep. The morning light is pathetic, a bruised purple filtering through the canopy that barely registers on my internal clock. The storm front I tracked on the barometer yesterday has stalled directly over the ridge, trapping the mountain in a pocket of low pressure and freezing drizzle. I force myself out of the sleeping bag, the cold air biting at my exposed skin immediately. My breath hangs in the room like a stationary fog. A quick check of the battery bank confirms my fears. 38%. The deficit is growing. The passive drain of the inverter, even in standby mode, combined with the lack of solar input, is slowly killing the system. I cannot crank the dynamo enough to offset this loss without exhausting my own calorie reserves, which are already critically low. I have to go outside. The solar panels need to be cleared of debris and angled to catch whatever diffuse light is penetrating the cloud deck. Suiting up is a ritual of layers. I start with the moisture-wicking synthetic base, then the wool mid-layer, and finally the Gore-Tex shell that has lost most of its waterproofing capability over the years. I wrap duct tape around my boot cuffs to seal them against the trousers. Ticks and leeches are less of a concern in this temperature, but the dampness is a pervasive enemy. I grab my rifle, a bolt-action .308 that I keep clean enough to eat off of. I don't chamber around. The sound of a bolt closing in the stillness of the morning is distinct and carries for miles. If I need to shoot, I am already dead. I clip a carabiner with a cleaning squeegee to my belt and unlock the door. The steel bars slide back on their greased tracks with a heavy, dull thud that I feel more than I hear. The forest is drowning. Stepping outside, the sound of the rain is a constant white noise roar that obliterates subtle acoustic cues. This is dangerous. I rely on my hearing to map the perimeter, but today I am deafened by the weather. I move towards the tree line where my primary solar array is hidden. The panels are flexible mats zip-tied to the upper branches of a massive oak, connected by a cable that runs down the trunk under a camouflage of faux bark tape. I begin the climb. The bark is slick with moss and rain. My gloves struggle for purchase. Every movement is calculated. A slip here means a broken bone. And in this isolation, a fracture is a terminal diagnosis. I ascend 6 meters, my heart rate spiking not from exertion, but from the exposure. I am now a silhouette against the sky, visible to anyone with optics in the valley below. Reaching the panels, the problem is immediately obvious. A slurry of wet leaves and pine needles has plastered itself across the photovoltaic cells, reducing their efficiency to near zero. I anchor myself to a sturdy branch using a climbing sling and begin to wipe them down. The squeegee drags across the plastic surface, pushing away the brown sludge. Underneath, the dark blue grid of the cells looks almost alien in this organic rot. I work quickly, my head on a swivel. The wind whips the branch, swaying me back and forth in a nauseating rhythm. Through a gap in the trees, I can see the valley floor. It is a sea of gray mist. No lights. No movement, just the dead world waiting below. I finish the cleaning and check the cable connections. The tape is peeling, exposing the copper to the air. I make a mental note to bring electrical tape next time. The descent is faster but more treacherous. My boots slide on the wet wood, and for a split second, I lose my grip, swinging out by one arm before recovering. The adrenaline dump is sharp and bitter. I hit the ground and immediately drop to a knee, scanning the brush. The disturbance I made was minimal, but my own noise discipline was compromised. I wait for 2 minutes, letting the forest settle. The rain continues its relentless assault. I check the telltales on the southern approach. The black thread is sagging, weighted down by water droplets, but unbroken. No one has walked this path. I move back to the shelter, walking backward for the last 10 meters to brush out my footprints with a pine branch, blending the mud back into a natural pattern. Back inside, the heavy door seals the world away again. The silence is sudden and ringing. I strip off the wet gear, hanging it near the stove where the residual heat can dry it. I check the charge controller immediately. The numbers are climbing, slowly. Input has jumped from 0 to 2 amps. It is a trickle, barely enough to keep the lights on, but it halts the decline. I permit myself a moment of relief. I sit at the workbench and dry my hands thoroughly before touching the electronics. Moisture on the skin changes the capacitance of the fingers, making fine adjustments on the radio knobs erratic. I pour a cup of lukewarm water and take a vitamin tablet, my last defense against scurvy. The afternoon drags on, the storm outside intensifying into a gale. The wind creates a vacuum effect in the shelter, causing the plastic tarps on the walls to breathe in and out with a crinkling sound that grates on my nerves. I try to focus on equipment repair. I have a stack of scavenged walkie-talkies, cheap consumer models, that I am trying to chain together to create a localized perimeter alarm system. It is delicate work. The circuit boards are cheap, the solder joints brittle. I work under a magnifying glass, my soldering iron set to the lowest temperature to save power. The smell of rosin flux is a comforting industrial scent that cuts through the mold. Around 1600 hours, the atmospheric pressure drops sharply. My ears pop painfully. Outside, thunder rolls, a low tectonic rumble that shakes the dust from the ceiling beams. I look at the main transceiver. The signal meter is pinning to the right, overwhelmed by the static charge in the air. QRN. Atmospheric noise. It makes long-range communication impossible. The ghost net is down. If anyone is calling for help right now, their voice is being swallowed by the lightning. I turn the RF gain down to save the speaker from blowing out, but the static persists. A jagged, rhythmic scratching that sounds like claws on stone. Then, the main radio dies. Not a fade out, but a hard cut. The power light is still on, but the audio is gone. The needle on the meter drops dead to the left. I freeze. My first thought is a fuse. I check the rear panel. The glass fuse is intact. I check the antenna connection. It is tight. I grab the multimeter and probe the power leads. 12, 4 volts. The radio has power. I tap the casing. Nothing. Panic begins to coil in my stomach. This unit is my lifeline. Without it, I am blind and mute. I pull the service manual, my hands trembling slightly. It could be the final stage transistor, blown by a nearby lightning strike that induced a surge in the ground dipole. If the final is blown, the radio is a brick. I have no replacement for a power transistor of this specific wattage. I begin to disassemble the radio case, the screws squeaking in protest. Inside, the smell of burnt silicon is faint but unmistakable. It confirms my fear. A component has fried. I stare at the circuit board, a complex city of green and copper that I can no longer govern. I am cut off. The realization hits me with physical force. I am alone in a stone box, buried in a mountain, with no way to hear the world dying. I sit back, the silence of the room amplifying the sound of my own breathing and the blood rushing in my ears. The wind outside is the only connection left, and it is a hostile one. I sit in the dark for what feels like hours, the dead radio sitting open like an autopsy on the bench. The storm is raging overhead now, the wind howling with a ferocity that vibrates the heavy oak door in its frame. The isolation is absolute. My mind starts to play tricks on me. I hear patterns in the wind, voices, engines, footsteps, but I know it is just pareidolia, my brain desperate to find a signal in the noise. I focus on the little Mo stove. I need to light it. The temperature is dropping, and the dampness is settling into my bones. I reach for the tinderbox, my movements mechanical. Suddenly a sound cuts through the room. It is not the wind. It is a sharp digital chirp. I freeze, my hand halfway to the stove door. The sound came from the far end of the workbench, from the pile of secondary equipment. It happens again. Chirp, hiss. It is the squelch breaking on the handheld scanner, the Baofeng UV5R that I use for short-range monitoring. The little red LED on the top is glowing. Someone is transmitting. But that is impossible. The scanner is set to a low-power frequency, a throwaway channel I use for testing. The range on these units in this terrain is less than 2 miles, and that's with line of sight. In this weather, in a valley, it should be hundreds of meters. I move slowly towards the workbench, treating the radio like a live explosive. The static hisses, clear and strong. There is no atmospheric interference. The signal is not bouncing off the ionosphere. It is punching through locally. I look at the signal strength meter on the tiny LCD screen. It is full bars. Saturation level. Whoever is transmitting is not just close. They are practically on top of me. I reach out and turn the volume knob up a fraction of a millimeter. The static clears, replaced by a carrier wave of total silence. Someone is holding down the push-to-talk button, waiting. It's cold out here, Derek. The voice is male, calm, conversational. It is not the distorted, gravelly voice of Quran. It sounds processed, lacking the low-end frequencies, tinny and metallic. My blood runs cold, freezing me in place. He used my name, not my call sign. My real name. I haven't spoken that name aloud in 2 years. I stare at the radio. The red light stays on. He is still transmitting. The voice continues, casual, as if discussing the weather. The wind is really picking up. You've got a cozy setup in there. I can smell the birch bark. I scramble backward, knocking over a tin of screws. They scatter across the stone floor with a crash that sounds like a gunshot in the small space. I dive for my rifle, bringing it up to my shoulder, aiming at the door. My heart is hammering against my ribs so hard it hurts. Who is this? I whisper, but I don't key the mic. I know better. If I transmit, I confirm my presence. But he already knows. He knows my name. He knows what wood I'm burning. Don't be rude, Sergeant, the voice says. The audio quality is strange. There is an echo, a rapid, ringing reverberation around his words. It sounds like he is speaking inside a metal tunnel. I'm not at the door. You don't need the rifle. Yet. I look at the signal meter again. It is locked at maximum, plus 160 dB. This isn't a transmission from the woods. This is immediate. I look around the room, my eyes wild, searching for a bug, a hidden speaker. The bunker is sealed. There is no way in. Where are you? I ask the empty room, my voice trembling. The radio crackles. Physics, Derek. Think about the acoustics. Where does the sound of birch bark go? The realization hits me like a blow to the gut. I drop the rifle to its sling and spin around to face the stove. The little Mo. The iron pipe that runs up through the rock and out into the forest floor above. The chimney. The reverberation in his voice is the sound of audio bouncing down a cast iron tube. I approach the stove, my steps silent. The firebox is cold. I didn't light it yet. I lean in, putting my ear near the iron door. The voice comes from the radio on the bench, but the presence is in the pipe. "That's it," the voice on the radio says, sounding amused. "Getting warmer. Or colder, really." I grab a flashlight and shine it into the gap between the stovepipe and the stone wall. I can't see anything. I unlatch the stove door and shine the light up into the baffles. There, dangling in the darkness of the flue, is a black cord. It descends from the chimney cap, snaking down through the soot. At the end of the cord, resting just above the baffles, is a small black plastic box. A radio. A transceiver set to Vox, voice activation. They lowered it down the chimney. They are on the roof. They are standing right above my head, separated only by 2 feet of dirt and rock. I stumble back, the horror of the tactical situation crashing down on me. My primary exit is covered. My ventilation is compromised. They have a direct line into the heart of my shelter. "We've been watching your heat signature for a week," the voice says, clear and triumphant. "That insulation is good, but the exhaust plume, it lights up like a beacon on thermal. Open the door, Derek. Let's talk about your battery collection." I look at the door, the heavy bolts, the steel reinforcement. It was designed to keep people out, but now it is locking me in. I look at the pressure gauge on the wall. The oxygen levels are normal, but that pipe is my lungs. If they block it, I suffocate. If they drop something down it, I look at the radio dangling in the soot. It swings gently, knocking against the iron wall. Clang, clang. The sound of the bell tolling for me. I move to the center of the room, away from the stove, away from the door. I need to think. My hands are shaking uncontrollably. I clasp them together, forcing the knuckles white. Protocol. What is the protocol for a siege in place? There isn't one. The protocol is E&E, escape and evasion. But I am trapped. I look at my equipment. The dead main radio, the battery bank, the oxygen tank and the medical kit. The pieces of the puzzle are there, scattered in the chaos of my workshop. "I'm going to give you 5 minutes," the voice says. "Then we start dropping things down the pipe that aren't radios. Think about it. The transmission cuts. The red light on the scanner goes out. The room returns to the sound of the wind howling outside and the metallic clang, clang of the intruder's radio swinging in my chimney. I check my watch. 16:42. 5 minutes. I rush to the stove and grab a heavy wool blanket. I jam it into the firebox, shoving it up past the baffles to block the pipe. It won't stop a grenade, but it might muffle the blast or stop gas from flooding the room immediately. I close the iron door and lock the handle. It is a futile gesture. If they block the cap up top, the smoke from any fire I light will kill me. If I don't light a fire, the cold kills me. If I open the door, they kill me. I turn to the battery bank. The lead-acid cells are heavy, archaic blocks of potential energy. I look at the wiring. If I short the terminals, I can create an arc flash, a fire, an explosion, a distraction, or a suicide vest. I grab the spool of spare copper wire. I strip the ends with my teeth, tasting the bitter plastic. I am not thinking about survival anymore. I am thinking about denial of assets, the code of conduct. I will not surrender the network. I hear a thud on the roof. It is heavy, distinct. A boot stomp, then another. They are walking on top of the nest. Dust trickles down from the ceiling boards. They are testing the structural integrity, or they are mocking me. 2 minutes, Derek. The voice comes through the scanner, even though the radio in the chimney is muffled. They have another transmitter. Of course they do. They are a pack. I grab the Baofeng. I hold the PTT button down. My thumb slides on the plastic, sweaty and trembling. I have to say something. I have to buy time. "If you drop anything down that pipe," I say, my voice cracking, dry and unused. I blow the batteries. "I'll take the whole hillside down." I release the button. Silence. Then a laugh. "Go ahead. We need the batteries, but we don't need you." The bluff failed. They know I'm a hoarder. They know I won't destroy the one thing keeping me alive. But they don't know about the hyperacusis. They don't know that the sound of their boots on my roof is driving me into a state of focused, psychotic clarity. I look at the medical oxygen tank. Pure O2. Accelerant. I look at the grease on the door tracks. Fuel. I look at the batteries. Ignition. I am not going to open the door. I am going to turn the nest into a bomb. I move the oxygen tank to the center of the room. I attach a regulator and open the valve fully. The hiss of escaping gas joins the wind. It is a clean sound. I start pulling wires from the main bank, twisting them together. I am building a dead man's switch. My hands stop shaking. The technical problem has a solution. The solution is fire. Time's up, the voice says. I hear a metallic scraping in the chimney. They are pulling the radio up, or they are dropping something down. I crouch behind the heavy workbench, clutching the two bare wire ends. I am the signalman, and this will be my final broadcast. I wait for the sound of metal hitting the baffle. I wait for the flash. The sound of metal striking metal echoes down the chimney. A harsh, dissonant clatter against the cast iron. It is not the radio this time. The object hits the wool blanket I stuffed into the firebox with a dull, muffled thump. For a second, there is silence, and then a distinct hissing sound begins, like a tire rapidly losing pressure. It is not an explosive. It is a canister. A white plume begins to seep around the edges of the stove door, heavy and opaque. CS gas. They are trying to flush me out. In a confined space like this, that concentration of chemical agent will induce vomiting and respiratory failure in less than 60 seconds. I grab the silicone mask attached to the oxygen tank, pressing it hard against my face. The seal is cold and wet, but as I crack the valve, the hiss of pure oxygen fills my ears, drowning out the panic. I am breathing clean, dry air, but my skin begins to sting as the gas permeates the room. The drilling starts at the main door. It is a high-pitched mechanical whine that vibrates through the stone floor and up into my boots. They are boring out the lock cylinders. The noise is a physical assault on my hypersensitive ears, a drill bit screaming against hardened steel. I can hear the variation in RPMs as the bit bites and slips. They will be through in under 3 minutes. I look at the battery bank. The lead-acid cells are heavy anchors, but the lithium-ion packs, the ones I salvaged from electric scooters and power tools, are the volatile payload. I have arranged them in a cluster on top of the workbench, directly under the wooden shelving unit. I strip the insulation from the main output wire of the solar controller. It is live. I engage the protocol of silence in my mind, forcing my trembling hands to move with robotic precision. I wrap the positive lead around the negative terminal of the largest lithium pack. I don't complete the circuit yet. I need a timer. I use a simple egg timer mechanism I scavenged from a kitchen unit, winding the spring tight. The ticking is loud in the gas-filled room, a rhythmic counterpoint to the drilling at the door. I attach the wire to the striker arm. When the bell rings, the circuit closes. A dead short on a 48-volt lithium array will cause immediate thermal runaway. The cells will swell, vent superheated electrolyte, and ignite. In an oxygen-enriched atmosphere, it won't just burn, it will incinerate. I set the timer. 90 seconds. The escape route is a desperate gamble. In the corner of the shelter, concealed under a stack of rotting pallets, is the drainage sump. It was originally designed to divert groundwater away from the foundation. A concrete pipe barely 24 inches in diameter that runs downhill and empties into a creek bed 100 meters away. I shove the pallets aside, the wood screeching against the floor. The grate is rusted shut. I grab a crowbar, jamming the tip into the mesh. I heave with everything I have, my back muscles screaming. The rust gives way with a snap that sounds like a bone breaking. I pull the grate free and toss it aside. The smell rising from the hole is foul, stagnant water, decay, and the metallic tang of sewage. I hear the drill punch through the first layer of the door, a change in pitch, followed by a heavy thud as someone hits the steel with a sledgehammer. The door frame groans. Dust falls from the ceiling. I look at the timer. 60 seconds. I throw my rucksack into the hole first. It contains my backup hard drive, the Baofeng, a knife, and a singular bottle of water. I take one last look at the nest. My workbench, my maps, the logs of every survivor I helped guide. It is all about to become ash. I feel a sharp pang of loss, not for the objects, but for the order they represented. I am trading my fortress for the chaos of the wild. I slide legs first into the pipe. The water is freezing, instantly soaking through my trousers and shocking my system. The pipe is tighter than I calculated. My shoulders scrape against the rough concrete walls. I have to exhale fully to squeeze my chest through the opening. I reach up and grab the edge of the floor, pulling the heavy grate back over the hole as best I can to delay the fire from following me down. Darkness swallows me. The only light comes from the faint glow of the radium dial on my watch. I begin to crawl. It is a worm's movement, digging my elbows into the slime and pushing with my toes. The air here is thin and tastes of mold. 30 seconds. I count the seconds by the rhythm of my own struggle. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The pipe is clogged with debris. I hit a blockage, a mass of dead leaves and twigs washed in by the storm. I panic, thrashing in the dark, tearing at the blockage with my gloved hands. My fingers touch something soft and wet, a dead animal. I suppress the urge to vomit, digging through the rot until I feel the flow of water again. I squeeze through the gap, the concrete tearing the fabric of my jacket. The sound of the drilling is faint now, muffled by the earth, but the ticking of the timer is etched into my brain. 0. The vibration hits me before the sound. A concussion wave travels through the earth, compressing the concrete pipe around me. It feels like the mountain itself has shuddered. Then comes the sound, a dull, heavy whump that resonates in my chest cavity. It is not the sharp crack of high explosives, but the deep, barometric heave of overpressure. The air in the pipe rushes past me, sucking backward toward the vacuum created by the fire consuming the oxygen in the shelter. I scramble faster, my knees raw and bleeding, driven by the primal fear of being cooked alive in a stone tube. The water level in the pipe begins to rise, pushed by the displacement. I am crawling through rising floodwater. I see a circle of gray light ahead, the exit. It is covered by a metal mesh to prevent animals from entering. I didn't account for this. I reach the end of the pipe, gasping for air. The mesh is welded to the concrete. I push against it, but it is solid. I am trapped. The smoke is starting to drift down the tunnel now, a thin, acrid tendril curling along the ceiling of the pipe. I grab the crowbar I instinctively dragged with me, jamming it through the diamond mesh. I leverage it against the concrete lip. I scream with the effort, the sound guttural and raw in the confined space. The weld pops. The mesh bends outward. I kick it with both feet, bursting out into the rain. I tumble down the muddy embankment, landing in the overflowing creek. The water is violently cold, stripping the heat from my body in seconds. I scramble up the opposite bank, slipping on wet roots, desperate to put distance between myself and the thermal signature. I collapse behind a fallen hemlock, gasping, shivering violently. I look back up the hill. A plume of black, oily smoke is rising from the ground, punching through the camouflage of the rhododendrons. The earth above the bunker has collapsed inward. The nest is gone. The batteries did their job. The fire will burn for days, melting the radio, the codes, the maps. I lie in the mud, the rain washing the sewer slime from my face. My hands are numb, useless claws. I fumble for the pocket of my jacket, pulling out the Baofeng UV5R. It is wet, caked in mud. I wipe the screen with my thumb. It flickers. Low battery. I attach the earpiece, shoving the bud into my ear to block out the storm. I need to know. I tune to the militia frequency. The static is deafening, the lightning still scrambling the airwaves. I adjust the squelch, waiting. Sector 4 is clear, structure compromised, fire containment in progress. The voice is Karen's. He sounds bored, professional. No visual on the target. We have a collapse. Assume he's buried in there. My heart hammers against the wet ground. They think I'm dead. I have achieved the ultimate camouflage. I am a ghost. But then, the transmission clicks again. Wait, hold on. A pause. I hear the sound of rain on his end. Check the drainage output. The grid references indicate a sluice to the south. My stomach drops. They are thorough. They have the blueprints of the CCC camps. They know about the pipes. I try to move, to stand up, but my legs are unresponsive. Hypothermia is setting in. I need to move, but I am paralyzed by the cold and the fear. Signalman! The voice comes through my earpiece. It is the other voice, the one from the chimney. The one who knows my name. He is on a localized frequency, scanning for my specific radio signature. He knows I'm listening. You didn't really think we'd check the front door and ignore the back, did you? That was a nice pop, Derek. Very dramatic. But now you're wet, you're cold, and you have no walls. I stare at the radio in my hand. The red light is blinking. He is triangulating the receiver's local oscillator. Every second I keep this radio on, I am painting a target on my chest. But I can't turn it off. I am frozen by the intimacy of his voice. It sounds like he is standing right behind the tree. I spin around, raising the crowbar, but there is only the gray curtain of rain and the dark pillars of the trees. Run, rabbit, the voice whispers. The hunt is so much better when you run. I smash the radio against a rock. The plastic shatters, the battery flying off into the brush. Silence returns, save for the wind and the rain. I am alone. I have no shelter, no comms, no heat, just a knife, and the knowledge that I am being tracked by men who treat war as a sport. I force myself to stand. I take a step, then another, moving deeper into the dark heart of the Appalachians. The signal is lost. But the noise never stops.